Thanks a lot. Mr. Simonovic, I wanted to ask you about the UN's human rights due diligence policy. And because in the past the mission had supported units of the South Sudanese Army and police, is your office or is the mission keeping track of allegations against particular commanders and units so that if things were to return to a normal state, they wouldn't in fact end up providing support to the same units? And if you can, is your office involved in the implementation of the human rights due diligence policy in MONUSCO and its potential assistance to the Congolese Army in fighting the FARDC? It said that two generals are on the red list, but it's resulting in the UN not participating in taking the fight to the FDLR with all of their abuses. What's the role of your office in that? And thanks a lot.
Thank you for this question. It is quite important to clarify. Human rights due diligence policy is not a policy of OHCHR or High Commission of OHCHR. It is Secretary General's policy. So it creates obligations for the whole United Nations system. Do we as OHCHR have an important role in this? Yes, we do. So in DRC, we do gather evidence about human rights violations and involvement in some troops led by certain commanders in human rights violations. And those information are being stored. Of course, in MONUSCO, we'd had more time to have such banks of information than we have in South Sudan. But as you have noticed, we do gather information on human rights violations. They do serve for public reporting, but certainly will also be used for human rights due diligence policy and the assessment whether certain forms of support can be provided for all security forces, being police, national security, or the army.
But is your office asked to give a kind of a recommendation of if a particular unit should be supported or not? I'm thinking of this 41st Battalion in the DRC and the Minova rapes. I hadn't known until recently, but it was now said that support was suspended to them. Do you play a role down in that kind of decision making, or do you just turn over your information and leave it up to DPKO or the mission?
Well, it's collaborative effort in which both DPKO and others participate, sharing their information. And I think it's good that it is done in such a way. What is also important to note, that the whole idea of human rights due diligence is not to cut the list of security forces that we support shorter, but to influence their behavior. So in case that we have a unit that does not have a clean human rights record, we do not simply reject support. We try to identify what could be the mitigating measures which certain unit should do, or certain force should do, in order to be able to enjoy our support. And it could be to have commanders that were not involved in human rights violations, or to provide certain training to soldiers which would include human rights training, or some other forms of mitigating measures. And of course, sometimes, although some mitigating measures have been introduced, still there are some violations. In that cases, quite often a mitigating measure is that there is some action taken against ones who have perpetrated those violations. So it's a sign of commitment that violations will not be tolerated, and if it's necessary, there are some additional measures introduced to reduce the risk of further violations.